Hi, everyone. I'm back for another episode of Let's Talk About It with Kristi Dosh, a former practicing attorney and sports business writer. She's a contributor at Forbes. Kristi's coming out with a new book coming out in July called The Athlete's NIL Playbook. I read it over this past week and wow, like if we could put Let's Talk About It and the resource page into book format, that would be your book. Kristi, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. I so appreciate the kind words. That book has been a labor of love over the last 4 years. And I still feel like it'll never feel done because things keep changing. But I've tried to give the best evergreen advice I can.
And especially with the House case, which our listeners, all of you guys are very familiar with at this point.
That was really hard because it's gone to print already.
Yeah.
So I had to turn it in and it will go to print without knowing what's going to happen in the House settlement. But I had that in the final chapter because student athletes were already getting the revenue sharing contracts.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be able to talk about what was in those contracts. And so I had to caveat it with a lot of stuff and say, hey, there's a dedicated website for the book. Mm-hmm. I will keep it updated after the book comes out in case anything major changes.
Let's just start out simple. We're going to start talking about contracts here. Can you explain like the current structure right now with collectives or with college athletic departments for athletes?
Yeah, so up until now, most of what we've seen has been NIL deals for the use of an athlete's name, image, and likeness on a jersey, on a trading card, to promote a local business, to sign an autograph. There's all these different ways you can monetize your NIL. It was really, I think, meant to be in the beginning deals between brands and athletes, or maybe even between individuals and athletes. If an individual had something they were trying to promote, like I could hire athletes to help promote my book. And those would be kind of traditional NIL deals. But then NIL collectives came along. And if you don't know what a collective is, it's just a group of boosters. Usually a collective only supports one school, although there are a few examples. There's one that supports a number of HBCUs and not just one. So there's a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, they support one school. And they started putting together these much larger contracts. And they would be for a season or for a school year. Generally speaking, they give a sum of money, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars, and like a laundry list of things that athletes have to do for that money. They have to make this many appearances, sign this many autographs, come to this meet and greet, show up for a Zoom Q&A. I mean, they are supposed to do things for the money, but there has been a big question as to whether athletes are really doing those things, if they're being paid market rate for those things, or are they really just being paid to play and the contracts are made to look like NIL deals. So we will see more of that, I'm sure, as we move forward.
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said about market rate. If I went back just a year ago now with the podcast and the sponsorships that I was doing and my market rate for Let's Talk About It versus what it is now, it's almost impossible to quantify these things. How are these figures being made in these contracts? How do athletes determine their market value?
Oh, okay. So I worked with an expert on this section in my book because I didn't feel like I should be the one telling people how to calculate it. I think women in particular, and I will lump myself in this category, are really bad about underpricing themselves. And
Yes.
I have seen female athletes again and again underprice themselves in NIL deals. And there's these calculators online specifically for social media deals. It gets more complicated when you're trying to figure out how to price yourself for speaking or price yourself for, an appearance. But there's all these social media calculators. But they're one size fits all. They're really just looking at your number of followers. Some of them you can connect your Instagram and it's going to look at your engagement rate as well. But it's not really looking at who you are and the value you bring as an individual. And so I worked on some very complicated formulas in the book with a woman named Brittany Hennessy, who has worked in the influencer marketing space for a long time. And she gives here's your base rate and here's what you add things on for. And I think you really have to come at it like that. And every single deal is different.
Yeah. And it's so important that you said that, recognizing what value you have beyond, the cookie cutter calculator or the black and white thing that people, that comes first to mind for a lot of people. Because I'm thinking when you get into this, you're sitting down with your athletic department, either one that you've been at for years or that as a 18-year-old, 17-year-old negotiating your first contract. It's probably your first time signing your name on a legal document ever for anything. You don't know. And I feel like so many athletes are kind of just trusting, the analysis of the department or now teams have general managers. And they might not know either the value, right? Are these athletic departments or these managers thinking about the value of a woman athlete. Social media, we have much higher engagement rates. We have usually, a stronger following, a community that we're building. Do you have any advice for the women athletes when it comes to their market value?
Yeah, I would say first to all athletes, I have some wonderful friends who work in athletic departments as NIL directors, and I'm starting to become friends with some of the new GMs.
Mhm.
But I don't think any of them would say their specialty is pricing. I don't
Yeah.
know any of them who feel super confident about that aspect of it. You really want an agent, a social media, somebody in a social media agency. It doesn't have to be a sports agent, but there's a lot of folks signing with these social media marketing agencies. And a lot of it's just talking to each other and sharing your rates with each other. I just had a conversation yesterday with a male sports reporter. He and I went and did the exact same speaking gig with the same group for the same amount of time. And I was getting paid like half of what he was getting paid. And I went back to the people and I said that I knew what he was getting and that I, thought that I should be getting that rate as well. And frankly, it did not go well. But I think that you have to fight and advocate for yourself. And the more information you have, like I would have never even gone and made my case. And I will say they did end up paying me, but that would have never happened if he and I hadn't been sharing our rates. And so unless you've got a confidentiality clause in your contract that doesn't allow you to talk about it, I think one of the best things athletes can do is just talk to each other about it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. So we were talking just there about agents and having a professional. At what point should someone be getting an agent or a lawyer for this negotiation, right? You might have a lot of athletes who are like, hey, I'm not that big, I'm not that worried about it. How serious, are these contracts?
For revenue sharing contracts you're getting from the university, 100% of the time, I think you need to have an attorney look at that.
Okay.
There are attorneys who are very affordable. There are attorneys who do the first consultation for free. I keep up a list of attorneys that I have vetted to some degree on businessofcollegesports.com. If you want to see a list of them and you're an athlete who's out there thinking, I need somebody and I don't know who to go to, DM me. I will help you get in touch with somebody. And not me, I don't do it. So I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I will point you towards people who will help you because there are some tricky things in these revenue sharing contracts. And I'm not saying the university is trying to trick you, but they're tricky in that you may not understand them. I read one the other day that I am a lawyer and I'm not sure I understood it because it just wasn't written well.
Mhm.
So in that case, you would go back and you would be requesting to revise the language so that it's a little more clear. And you should know that universities are negotiating these contracts. I did a webinar recently with an attorney who's been negotiating a lot of them, and we talked through some of the bad clauses he had seen, and he had gotten rid of those clauses almost 100% of the time. And so now you're talking about athletes he advised are out there on the field. They don't have all these restrictions. He got all these things taken out of their contract, but the guy they're playing next to didn't. And he has all those restrictions in his contract. So you're going to have players playing side by side who are essentially playing by different rules because one got an attorney and the other one didn't.
That's crazy. Like that. So I was working with my university over the last couple of months, just talking about the student athlete perspective of the house case and the ramifications and kind of giving perspective to them of like, what do student athletes actually want? And that was something I brought up. It's like, hey, you guys have had a year plus to consider, what, the base contract might look like, what kinds of things that you need to do to prepare. The student athletes at our school don't know anything unless they're listening to Let's Talk About It or they're reading your articles. Like they're not hearing these kinds of things. And I've been talking to my friends who get money from collectives at schools all across the country, all different sports. And what I've found is that for some schools, some coaches are controlling that collective money, even though it's supposed to be outside of the university, outside of the institution. So for example, you're late to practice and now you're fined $100. Right? Or, all of a sudden you didn't play so well and now your money is delayed. Or, and like you've talked about in your book and in some of your articles, you were promised a certain amount by a coach during the recruiting process. And then the collective was like, oh, we have nothing to do with that. They don't have decision-making power. What are some of those big pitfalls that student athletes need to be considering in these negotiations?
Yeah, you just hit on a big one. And it should be in writing. I have a group of parents on Facebook. 1,000 parents are in this Facebook group I run, and I talk to them all the time about this. It's got to be in writing. I don't care what they said on the visit. I don't care what they said on the phone. Even in text and emails, depending on the state you're in, sometimes you could admit those into evidence as proof that you had a deal with the coach or with the university. But the safest thing is to have a written contract, and you want it to be crystal clear about how much you're getting and when are you getting it? What are the dates for those payments, or how often are they happening? And then there's some words that in some clauses you want to look out for. I always tell people to look for the word exclusive or any version of it, exclusive, exclusivity, and figure out what are they talking about that, because that means you are agreeing to a relationship only with them. And with revenue sharing, one of the tricky things that could be in there is schools can now act as the exclusive marketing agent for an athlete. So the school could be your agent, and you wouldn't have the ability to hire an outside agent if it says that that relationship's exclusive. And I would not advise any student athlete to sign a contract where the school exclusively represents you. That there's too many conflicts of interest there. Look out for the word perpetuity. That is where the school or the collective, if it's an NIL deal with the collective, might try to use your NIL in perpetuity. So 10 years from now, when you're in a totally different industry, or maybe 10 years from now, you're an NFL or a WNBA star, they're still using your name, image, and likeness and making money off of it. You want to look out for those words and make sure that they're not in there, or if they are, that you understand what they apply to. And that's why you've really got to go talk to an attorney, because some of this language is tricky. And like I said earlier, even for a lawyer, sometimes it's not that it's tricky, it's just not written well. And the attorney can make sure that it gets revised so that it's very clear, just in case, on the off chance that something goes wrong down the road, or you're trying to transfer and this contract is holding up your transfer because maybe there's what's called a clawback provision where they could actually get money back from you that they already gave to you. We're already seeing a situation with Nico Iamaleava. We all know transferred from Tennessee to UCLA. His younger brother Madden decided to go as well, and the collective at Arkansas is actually trying to get him to pay back, not even pay back, they're trying to get him to pay money because he left. There is a damages clause in his contract, and they're saying that his contract has to be bought out by him or by UCLA. And we'll see if a court will actually uphold that. But you got to know that stuff is in your contract before you sign it.
Yeah, those are all, so paying attention to those words. And then what I'm also hearing is considering the transfer portal and the longevity of your career, right? You're signing a contract as a freshman, potentially even a red shirt, potentially someone who isn't seeing a lot of playing time. By your junior and senior year, you're leading the league in whatever stat. You're going to want a very different contract. What is kind of your advice for that?
If you do long-term contracts, then you do have to be careful of things like the buyout clauses and the clawback. That's going to be more common in contracts that are for more than one school year or one season. They can still be good, but you would want to have some sort of built-in, they usually call them look-ins. It
Okay.
exists in the house case. In fact, every fourth year, so every 3 full years of the house settlement, there's a look-in where they will sort of run the formulas again to see, has revenue increased in college athletics? And so now we should move the cap up a little bit. So it has built-in look-ins. You could have built-in look-ins in your contract with a school as well.
That's awesome. And I just want to say to the listeners right now, if you're feeling confused, take a second to go back and listen to our episode with Stephanie Verdoya, one of the lawyers working on the house case, to get an idea of this. And then you can also just listen to our episode with Arthur Bryant talking about kind of Title IX and collectives for the women athletes out there, or just people who are supporting.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing about this idea of kind of thinking about your future. You may think that this is the only school you've ever wanted to go to. You're so excited this is where you're going. And you might think sports first, like, okay, maybe the coach leaves, maybe you're not getting enough playing time. But also think about this. Actually, a lot of the athletes I've spoken to who have sort of gotten caught up in this, it's that they got through undergrad and they've still got eligibility left. Maybe they redshirted, they're done with their undergrad degree, and the school they're at doesn't have the graduate degree that they want. And
Yeah.
they need to transfer to be able to pursue their graduate education. Like, you just don't know where you're going to be at, not just in your sport, but academically, 3, 4, 5 years from now. So you want to set yourself up to have that flexibility.
That's a really good point. We're talking so much about your market value, and we're really just talking about like athletic performance and, direct payment. Do I need to be writing in like I need meals after practice and I need my rent for my apartment. Like, what else am I putting in this contract?
Yeah, I mean, the sky is the limit. You can ask for all sorts of creative things. I think, too, if you're an athlete who knows you're not going to be pro in your sport immediately after graduation and you're starting to think about what that career after graduation is going to look like, you can ask for some non traditional things that are not necessarily money based. I had an athlete who every time she did an NIL deal, she would ask to have a call with the CEO of the company. And she would get on the phone and talk to them about, how did you get here? What was your career trajectory? And she was networking, and it's really paying dividends after graduation. And I think you could start asking for that in these revenue sharing deals too. Like, we know that female athletes are not going to get a huge percentage of the revenue share. There are for sure going to be Title IX battles down the road over this, but I think to begin with, we're not going to see a ton of female athletes getting it. But
Yeah.
you could ask for some other things like time with sponsors or with certain boosters, maybe, who are in industries you think you want to go into after graduation. Like, ask for some of those things that they can do for you that go beyond just cash.
That is such a good point, and really something for student athletes to be kind of forward thinking with. Definitely a scary time for student athletes, but also a time with a lot of opportunities where you can kind of take advantage. Kristi, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, it's Sydney. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Let's Talk About It. If you did, make sure to leave a review and send it to a friend. Let's keep this conversation going. I'll see you guys next week.